Gone Girl is the movie that introduced me to David Fincher. I think it was probably the first movie with the 15+ rating that I saw in cinemas, and looking back on that 3 years later, this was a pretty intense movie to introduce me to that rating, but so far it's worked out okay, so we'll move on. The thing that I loved about watching all of Fincher's movies is his command over the craft. It's admirable to me that regardless of what he's working with story-wise, I can always say that the directing is fantastic. But the best Fincher movie is one where the screenplay holds its own in terms of quality against Fincher's directing, and Gone Girl is one of those movies where I can praise in equal parts the story and how it's presented. Gone Girl is a movie that follows the trend of David Fincher films that fuck with your head and make it really difficult to trust any of the characters. But rather than stick to this for the full movie, the film unravels the story slowly. While it's difficult to see what side is the truth for the first hour or so of the film, it uses this to build up expectations about the characters. Personally, I felt like the story's structure made it easier to relate to the film's main character Nick, because the audience had essentially been put through the same experience as him. The film's structure also puts you in the mind of Amy and in the middle of the relationship that her and Nick had. How the marriage and the relationship affected both the characters becomes evident in how each of their perspectives is presented. Even though one of their perspectives eventually does come out as the truth, the fact that the other one was in the story at all gives an interesting insight into the character. To continue from what I was saying before, the first hour of Gone Girl was integral to how engaged I was with the rest of the film. Added to how hard it is to pick a side in the early stages of the movie is the intrigue that's set up into Nick and Amy's marriage. The contrast between the griminess of the investigation and the romantic excitement of the stories being told to the audience about the early stages of Nick and Amy's relationship is what initially got me engaged with the premise of the movie. As the exposition about Nick and Amy's marriage begins to catch up with what's happening in the present day, it begins to fit with the different sides of the investigation. The plot of Gone Girl is one that I personally think could have gone very wrong very easily. When I was younger and I was first starting to get into writing, I was inspired to write something in a similar vein to Nick's arc in Gone Girl. And when I reread what I'd written a couple weeks ago, it makes it really easy to recognize how easily the characters can become incredibly cliche and the story can become incredibly bland in a movie like this one. There are moments where I feel Gone Girl falls into this, but they are handled well, so it's not a big issue. For me, one of the greatest achievements of the film is the plot and the characters serve each other. The realism and consistency of the characters keeps the story grounded, and the events of the story reveal a lot about the characters. The consistency of the characters is refreshing to me because despite understanding why characters are acting in certain ways, I can also see why other characters see them the way they do. As I said, the story reveals a lot about each character, and it does this by putting them in situations where they can be themselves free of any stress or burden, and in situations where they're unsure of what to do and are reverting to instincts to try and deal with problems. The performances are just as consistent as the character writing, and watching the movie again today, there's a lot of subtlety in how characters react to new information about the case. A lot of what is revealed to be the truth later in the movie is something that can be seen in the body language of different characters when they find out something new. Once again, it goes without saying that Fincher brings the talent in this movie. But also at this stage in reviewing his movies, I don't know how much there is that I can say about his style that I haven't already said. Obviously, Gone Girl is gorgeous, and the editing exemplifies all the right things in the different performances. But I think what's cool about the presentation of the film is it allows the characters to run the movie. While the cinematography is tense and good looking, the visuals of the film take a back seat and don't distract from the story. The thing that does stand out about Gone Girl amongst Fincher's other work is its score and how it's used. Like the visuals, its place in the film is to serve the characters and the story, but it does take center stage every so often, and when it does, it's excellent. It's a score that involves a minimal amount of melodies, and most of the songs build from nothing to a wall of sound and suspense. It's more of a sound design than a score, and it makes for great contrast between the melody-driven pieces and the industrial sound compilations. The score manages the tension and intrigue of Gone Girl expertly. As an example, in one of the scenes where I think the story does become kind of bland, the thing that saves it is the way the score builds up and fades out like the most important part of a scene is over, before it comes back full force right as you start to relax. If there's one thing I need in my life, it's more David Fincher movies, and Gone Girl only serves to remind me of that. The fact that there's nothing on the horizon for him at the moment means that I'll be rewatching movies like Gone Girl while rocking back and forth until something is finally announced.
And, Gone Girl? Yeah, it's a 9 out of 10.